A former U.S. president has been charged with multiple, 37 in this case, federal charges stemming from the investigation into his removal of classified material from the White House and his attempts to hide it from authorities. This is the second time Mr. Trump has been indicted this year. These federal criminal charges are part of a two-pronged investigation being conducted by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, who is also looking into Mr. Trump's role in the events leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Smith was named to oversee the investigation following the FBI's seizure of classified documents from Mar-a-Lago in August of 2022. The 49-page indictment outlining the evidence against Mr. Trump is exhaustive in its detail. Prosecutors accuse Mr. Trump of conspiracy to obstruct justice, making false statements, and allege his willful retention of hundreds of classified documents, including some that contain top-secret military plans and information about U.S. nuclear capability and vulnerability. The indictment leaves little to the imagination. It uses photographs of boxes of materials, including the classified documents, stored carelessly in open locations at Mar-a-Lago, including a public ballroom, a bathroom, and spilled over a storage room floor. It cites detailed notes by Trump's attorney, audio tapes of the former president showing classified materials in two instances to people without security clearance, noting that, quote, as president, I could have declassified, but now I can't, undermining the former president's public defense that anything he took was automatically declassified.
Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
Flashback to the 2016 campaign when Mr. Trump highlighted the investigation into the misuse of Hillary Clinton's non-secure email server to forward classified emails. Back then, he repeatedly pledged to enforce all laws protecting classified information.
We can't have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't understand the meaning of the word confidential or classified.
Most of Mr. Trump's 2024 rivals and supporters in Congress did not address the substance of the indictment, but complained that it existed at all, declaring it an example of government abuse.
You can't have one faction of society weaponizing the power of the state against factions that it doesn't like, and that's what we've seen.
A few contenders say the actions of Mr. Trump show he should not be president. Former Vice President Mike Pence, who announced his campaign this week, says, wait and see.
We also need to hear the former president's defense. Then each of us can make our own judgment on whether this is the latest example of a Justice Department working in injustice or otherwise.
For Mr. Trump's MAGA faction, there is no otherwise.
If you want to get to President Trump, you're going to have to go through me, and you're going to have to go through 75 million Americans just like me. And I'm going to tell you, most of us are card-carrying members of the NRA. That's not a threat. That's a public service announcement.
On the campaign trail Saturday, former President Trump tried to turn his personal woes into a campaign message.
I put everything on the line. I will never yield. I will never be deterred. I will never stop fighting for you. Never.
There are a lot of questions we're going to try to answer today, and we want to explore how these aren't just documents in a criminal proceeding. They are also a window into the behavior of a candidate, a man who would like to be given responsibility with the most sensitive things a president handles again. We begin with our chief election campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. Bob, you've been reporting inside the Trump team, the legal team, but also getting reaction on the former president's response to all of this. What are you hearing?
John, good to be with you. Last night, as the former president was traveling around the country, his aides and allies say he was defiant privately, furious about this indictment, and pledging to stay in the race even if he is convicted of a federal crime. Some of his allies described privately his behavior and his conduct yesterday as someone somewhat akin to what happened in October 2016 with the Access Hollywood tape, and that dropped, and it created a major political crisis. What did he say then? I'll never quit the race. That's what he's saying this weekend. But Trump faces so much uncertainty, both politically and legally. His own legal team continues to have this unfolding shakeup. 2 lawyers left the team in recent days, and now some of his remaining lawyers are trying to get it all together, but they're trying to still come up with a strategy. How are they going to counter this sweeping indictment?
Bob, there's something, one of the most striking parts of the indictment is a transcript of a conversation the former president had with some authors who were in front of him, and in that conversation he mentions Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, which immediately reminded me of the reporting you did for your book, Peril. What do you make of the former president bringing up the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
In recent days, John, we've been casting our net widely, trying to figure out, why did this all happen? Why did the former president bring these documents back to Mar-a-Lago? What was the motivation? And part of our answer in our reporting is that he was angry. So much of this, as with many Trump stories, is driven by grievance. His grievance with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the recent one, Mark Milley, and how Mark Milley, in the public eye, was becoming a major figure in 2021. And to counter Milley's growing public profile, Trump, in interviews with reporters and friends, he started to bring out documents to make his own case on national security, on foreign policy, to say that he was, in a sense, better than Milley, that Milley didn't know what he was doing. And when he did this, according to our sources, he was cavalier, bringing out things he should not have shown to people writing books and writing articles.
We mentioned the fact that this is happening in the campaign context, what people sometimes call the campaign a job interview. This is a candidate who's had the job before, and this is a way he treated it. What's been the response? Treated the obligations of the job. What's been the response inside the Republican race to this indictment?
There is alarm in the sense that they believe if he wins the presidency again, he is so now comfortable with the levers of power, and he ignores the rule of law in the eyes of some of his competitors, that he could be a threat to American democracy. Yet very few are saying that publicly, because they know Trump voters across the country who they want to win over are still standing with Trump as he faces this legal showdown. But former Vice President Mike Pence, who recently jumped into the race, has said that Trump, in his view, doesn't follow the Constitution, doesn't understand the rule of law. And former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is making a similar case against Trump. So there's a bit of a growing refrain. But so many of the rival campaigns at this point are in a wait-and-see mode. They know that on the horizon is not only a trial with this federal special counsel indictment, but also another possible federal indictment on the ongoing January 6th case. And in August, you could have an indictment in Georgia over Trump's pressuring of election officials, and of course, the ongoing trial and litigation that looms on the horizon in New York.
CBS News Chief Campaign and Elections Correspondent Robert Costa. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
For more on the legal implications, we're joined by Senior Investigative Correspondent Catherine Herridge and CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. Ricky, I want to start with you. You've been a prosecutor and a defense lawyer, so what stands out to you now that you've read this indictment?
I think what stands out, obviously, is the magnitude of detail in this indictment. It's not only that you're dealing with 31 counts under the Espionage Act, which simply means the unlawful, willing retention of classified information or even unclassified information that would hurt the defense of the United States and aid our enemies. It's the detail of a speaking indictment. We have to remember that much of this indictment, John, is to educate not only ultimately a court and jury, but it's really to educate the public. Much of this indictment, in terms of the detail, may not even come into evidence in terms of what's admissible or not in the course of a trial. What also strikes me, John, is the overwhelming detail leaves the Trump legal team with real need to have powerful motions to dismiss. Because if this goes to trial, the way it reads, it's rather overwhelming for anyone to be able to fight it on the facts themselves.
And I want to get to that motion to dismiss question in a moment, but Catherine, you've been doing reporting about the risk assessment, about just what was in these documents. Educate us on that.
Well, what jumps out to me, John, is when you go to the section on the willful retention of national defense information. By my count, there are 21 top secret documents, and the disclosure of top secret information has the expectation of exceptionally grave damage to national security. But what else stands out to me is some of the classified codings like TK or talent keyhole. You don't see that very often. That's about intelligence from overhead imagery. For example, if we're looking at a terrorist target, do we have such good visibility that we can count the hairs on their head? Can we see what they're eating for breakfast on their terrorist patio? Those are capabilities that we don't want our adversaries to know that we have. Then also special access programs, or SAP. These are highly restricted programs because of the sensitivity of the intelligence and the technology, such as stealth technology, for example. Think of classified information like the Pentagon. Special access programs are these handful of rooms where there's just a limited number of keys to control and restrict access to that information.
So it's not just secret, it's the top of the top of the top.
Some of these are way beyond top secret. Like I said, talent keyhole, when you're talking about special access programs, or SCI, sensitive compartmentalized information, these really are the crown jewels of the U.S. intelligence community.
Ricky, let me ask you about a part of this indictment which comes from one of the former president's lawyers. Educate us on the crime fraud exception, how it's possible for a prosecutor to have this information, and is that a weakness? Because we know from our reporting that this is something that the Trump defense team is going to talk about, is the behavior of the prosecutors.
We all believe that when you go to a doctor, that there's a privilege, that what you say and what your ailments are will remain confidential. Same thing if you go to a clergy person. And it's exactly the same thing when you go to a lawyer. You believe that if you are a client, that what you say will never be disclosed to anyone, let alone in a grand jury or a court of law. It's called the attorney-client privilege. It protects all conversations relating to legal advice. So how did it get broken? That is, how did a court in Washington, D.C., a judge, and then an appellate court affirm the idea that you could hear, listen, read the notes and the voice memos of a lawyer to testify against his own client? It's called the crime fraud exception. So what the court believed was the conversations between Evan Corcoran, the lawyer, and Donald Trump were really in furtherance of a crime or a fraud. And he was ordered and forced to testify. Now, one could say, well, that's one and done. So now Mr. Corcoran is going to be a witness in this case should it go to trial. But we have to remember that that took place, that decision, in the District of Columbia. Now we are in Florida. So can it come up to a new judge? Might a new judge decide that it is not admissible at trial? Yes. Will that hurt the case? Not necessarily. There's plenty of other evidence.
Catherine, I've got two questions for you. The first is, what happens if you're just a regular old Joe and you have this kind of information? Legally, what happens to you? What's happening?
Well, as one example, I have contacts who work in the nuclear weapons capability arena. Let's say you have a nuclear document, it's on top of a photocopier, you walk away, you leave it there. Your clearance is gone, you are out the door. There are immediate consequences.
Let me ask you about a number of the president's defenders. Well, first of all, we should note the current president is under investigation by a special counsel. We don't know much about that, but Republicans have brought that up in defending the president. They've also brought up the case of Hillary Clinton. You've been looking at that. Give us a sense of the apples and oranges, or apples and apples, in comparison with what's on the table.
Well, what strikes me, John, in this indictment is I think the special counsel Jack Smith specifically charged willful retention of national defense information in an effort to sort of blunt criticism that these cases may be the same. If you go back to the summer of 2016, then FBI Director James Comey said that they found multiple email chains on Hillary Clinton's private server that she used for government business that contained highly classified information, including these special access programs that we just discussed. But in his view, it should not be charged because he didn't feel there was sufficient evidence of intent or willfulness. Critics would say that even just purchasing the server was an example of intent. And then finally, you have to look at just the scope of the information and also the timeline. But I think this charging of willful retention really is by design.
Right, the facts of the case quite different, but thank you so much for that and for all your other answers. And Ricky Kleeman, thank you. And Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us.
Among the public that says yes, it is.
Yes. It's good to have you here. What's the reaction, Mitt?
Morning, John. Start with Republican primary voters, because we're in the heat of this campaign. They say it does not matter. They expressly say that this will not change their views. And maybe that doesn't surprise. They've been with Donald Trump for years. But what's interesting is the why. When you ask if they're more concerned that this is politically motivated or if there's a national security risk, they come down heavily on the politically motivated side. At 76% of them saying that. And you know what's interesting about this is you juxtapose that against the broader public, who is much more split. And in many cases, the public says these aren't mutually exclusive. It can be in part both. But the Republican primary voter, Donald Trump is still on top, and this hasn't changed anything.
And the general election voter, so the Republican Party primary voter overwhelmingly, but when you mix it all together, the majority believes what of the country?
So if you take out just the potential national security risk and you ask people, is this one? Well, you get this big number among the public that says, yes, it is.
Yes, it is a national security risk.
Yes, it is a national security risk, if true. If, in fact, as alleged, there were nuclear plans or military plans in these documents. That's at 69%. But you want to see that in comparison to the Republican primary voter, for whom that number is much lower.
Sure.
It's at 38%. So it's that difference that I think is essential to understanding why you're going to see the rhetoric on the Republican side, on the campaign trail, that's talking about what they say is political motivation as opposed to national security risk.
So what happens if the president is actually convicted?
So if you look ahead to that possibility, we ask, would that be disqualifying for him to be able to serve a second term if elected to what? Republican primary voters overwhelmingly say, no, that's not disqualifying. He ought to still be able to serve. And they're at 8 and 10 on that. But the public is majority saying he cannot. So look, you get through the primaries and you wonder about general election implications here. That difference is going to matter. But for now, for Republicans, it is not disqualifying.
And finally, a question of history. We all remember the lock her up chants from the 2016 campaign from Donald Trump's supporters at rallies. What did the surveys show then about the way Republican primary voters thought about the allegations that Hillary Clinton had misused classified data?
Well, back in the summer of 2016, our polling showed that Republicans overwhelmingly thought that what they thought she did was wrong and was even illegal. Okay? Now, look, that may have ultimately had electoral implications for her as well. But I think the takeaway from that comparison is that sometimes when the public makes up its mind, it's often politics first. It's who is doing something as opposed to the abstract of what may have happened.
And Anthony, we'll have more discussion about politics later in our broadcast with our political panel, where we'll talk about the state of the race. We'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation. Stay with us.
Had was really
do you think that the current frontrunner of the Republican nomination should be given the responsibility to handle the most sensitive national security documents again with re-election?
Well, I guess we're going to find out. Yeah, I mean, look, if half of what they say they can prove is provable, then he's got a real problem on our hands, and it's self-inflicted. Let's remember that. This is he had every chance in the world to hand all those files and documents back. He did just the opposite. He bragged about keeping them. So this is very self-inflicted. I mean, I guess we'll find out of the 37 or whatever charges there are, how many he's potentially found guilty on. So we'll see where it goes and what's disqualifying and not. But I think, you know, that last segment you had was really telling. It's just another example that he could win the nomination, but mathematically cannot win in November of 24, which is why the Republican Party needs to look to another candidate, and they've got a lot of great options before them.
This seems to provide an opportunity for them to not look to another candidate because they are rallying around him. I want to read you something from the National Review, which wrote about this indictment. It is impossible to read the indictment against Trump in the Mar-a-Lago document case and not be appalled by it. The way he handled classified documents as an ex-president and responded to the attempt by federal authorities to reclaim them. You seem to share that view, but many, the majority in your party and the majority of public officials, have exactly the opposite view.
Yeah, so this is the problem that the Department of Justice has, and whether you want to agree with it or not doesn't matter. The reality is a lot of people are looking at that kind of cloud that sits over the DOJ and says there has been a little too much politics in that department over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of allegations of political handling, so they have the responsibility to say, look, this is different, this is much more severe, and I think they have to do that.
Let me ask you this, Governor, but first of all, the Department of Justice is investigating the sitting president. There's a special counsel, so the same standard is applied to him. And isn't it not the Department of Justice that's applying a different standard, but the politicians who are the same ones in some cases, Kevin McCarthy and others, who are applying a standard to Donald Trump that they did not apply to others? Hillary Clinton was the primary one.
Yeah, but you can't equivocate. Yeah, if I may, you can't equivocate the two, right? So you have folks on the you equate the two. Sorry, but look, those are politicians. They're on the Republican side for the most part. They're going to defend a political position. The DOJ has a responsibility to be above it all, and should be, and historically has been, but recently has not been. And so the average American watches this. You and I are in the weeds, right? We're talking about this issue all the time over the last 48 hours. The average American's looking at this thing for 90 seconds. And they're saying, wait a minute, they found files over there, they found a server in Clinton's bathtub over there, they found files over here. What's the difference? And there is a very clear difference. There's a huge difference. But it has to be explained to the American people.
But I mean, Governor, that's like saying New York and New Hampshire are the same because they have the word new in their titles. I mean, there are great differences in terms of obstruction of justice in the cases of, say, President Biden and the case of President Trump, former President Trump. So let me ask you, but we're going to run out of time, unfortunately, so hold on. We're going to get you on the other side of the half hour, and we'll come back to this. We're going to take a break. Stay right there. We've got more when we come back to Face the Nation. We'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation, including more with Governor Sununu and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return now to the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu. Governor, we were talking about the uniform application of standards, whether it's by politicians or the Department of Justice. The former Attorney General Bill Barr weighed in on this question on Fox News when he was asked about whether this is politically motivated. He said, I defended the president on Russiagate. I stood up and called out Alvin Bragg, that's the Manhattan District Attorney, politicizing the hit job, and I have spoken out for 30 years about the abuse of criminal justice process to influence politics. But this is simply not true. So you have the former Attorney General saying that these charges of weaponization are not true. I wonder what you think a responsible politician looking at the evidence before us should say about the Department of Justice, and whether there's any danger in saying weaponization when you have a former Attorney General saying, no, this is on the level.
No, I think that's a great point. I think Bill Barr is absolutely right. I don't see this as being political, but again, the point I keep going back to is the average person may still think it's political, and a lot of people clearly do. And so if you're going to take unprecedented steps like this, as valid as they are, as valid as they are, then they have to, again, acknowledge the responsibility of showing all sides of it, showing how it's not political, not just saying, don't worry, it's not political. They've done that before, and it didn't work out so well.
Prove
so they
it.
have the responsibility
Prove
of
it.
showing how it isn't political, to give that calm, to give that confidence and that trust in the system, so when this goes forward, and if and when he is found guilty, there's trust that it was done the right way.
As a politician of good faith, what is one's responsibility when surveying this? When you know it's not a weaponization, when you know there's no evidence of weaponization, what should you say to the public? The public may feel one thing, but if the facts of the case suggest more complexity and gray areas, what does a politician of good faith say to the public?
Yeah, well, look, I'm a big believer. Everyone has to be very straightforward and transparent about it and acknowledge the realities of the severity of these accusations and these allegations, and the fact that they're very real, they're self-inflicted. This is nothing like anything we've seen before, and there's very likely, I think, going to come down to some type of guilty verdict on the president, at least on some of these charges. And so, again, we all have that responsibility. Now, who takes that? Who wants to play political games? That's, I guess everyone, unfortunately, will tend to do that on both sides of the aisle, by the way. You just have to acknowledge both sides of this. You really do.
Let me move on to the state of New Hampshire, the first primary. Does this, you want to change the conversation away from Donald Trump and to get some other candidates and perhaps get another nominee? Does this focus in the rallying around the former President Trump make that much more difficult?
It makes it more difficult, but look, my message to all the candidates is very clear. You better come out, just as you acknowledge. You have to come out, and they have to come out and acknowledge this is different, this is serious. If even half of this stuff is true, he's in real trouble, and it is self-inflicted. And I just see too many of the candidates trying to walk around it. We'll see what happens. To your point, you have to be clear and transparent. You're running against this guy. He's whooping you by 40 points. Everybody needs to come out in concert, so it's not just a Chris Christie hitting Donald Trump or this candidate hitting Donald Trump. It is a party message. That's very, very important, because Donald Trump doesn't represent the Republican Party. He only represents himself. And so that is shown when all the candidates come out equally and unequivocally talking about this issue in the right way.
Did you mention that to Governor Burgum when you had breakfast with him this morning?
Absolutely. Look, Doug is an incredible governor. I think he's going to be a great candidate. He's hitting the ground running with all the things that you need to be successful. And a lot of the other candidates are kind of turning their machines on and starting to hit the ground. So we'll see where it all goes. But I think Doug's a great governor, and he's gonna kind of be a spark to watch this fall.
Another person you met with this week got into the race, former Vice President Mike Pence. Here's the thing that puzzles me. He is, by every measure of the old style of politics, a good old-fashioned conservative. And yet the polling consistently shows that though protesters at those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th called for his hanging, he seems to have paid a political price for that, more than the person who led to the circumstances that had them call for his hanging, which is to say his former boss. What does that say about the nature of things?
Well, look, all the candidates are a little bit different, but I think you have three candidates in a similar position, all great people, great candidates. Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, former Vice President Pence. These are all folks that were on the Trump team, right? And now they're kind of off the team, and they're all running against him. So they each just have to make their cases. They know how to run a ground game. They know how to talk to folks with a sense of authenticity about what it is and what has changed between then and now. But each of those candidates are in, I think, a similar position, will have to make their case as to why they not just have earned the job, but what's going to spark them? What's going to spark them beyond 5, 6, 7% in the polls to get people excited this fall?
All right, Governor Chris Sununu, thank you so much for being here. We'll be talking to you again for sure. Appreciate it. And we'll be right back. Three more Republicans jumped into the presidential primary race last week. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum was one of them. He is campaigning in New Hampshire and joins us from Manchester. Good morning, Governor. Thank you for being with us. You're trying to break through. All candidates running against Donald Trump are. This indictment, whatever you may think about the details of it, creates an opportunity to talk about the responsibilities, obligations, and character of the job. So is it an opportunity for you, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, John, you've written eloquently about the presidency being the hardest job in the world, and I think part of your thesis was priorities, and this is something that we've been talking about. We're on day 4 on the campaign trail, and talk about that, and it sort of we make sure that people understand, who we are, why we're running, and what we'll do, and who we are. I'm a small town kid in North Dakota. I've had jobs growing up where you shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. Went from those small town roots. My dad died when I was a freshman in high school. I got a little bit of farmland, mortgaged that. That became the seed capital for a startup software company, which grew into $1 billion company with small town kids from all over North Dakota working for that company. And we had 130,000 customers and 120 companies. It's like one of these only in America type stories. And the reason why we're running is we know that now, having been governor the last 6.5 years, I know when you're in the top spot in an executive role, how you pick your priorities, what you focus on. You have an opportunity to improve the life of every citizen, and that's what we're planning on doing, is improving the life of every American and bringing out the best of America. And how we're going to do that is we're going to focus on 3 things. The economy, it's touching everybody right now. Energy policy, that touches everybody right now and completely related to national security. Those 3 things are interrelated, and right now we feel it's not just a course correction, but the Biden administration is 180 degrees in the wrong direction on the economy, on energy policy, and on national security, and that's what we're going to focus on and talk about in our campaign.
And that's when you wake up every day as a chief executive who's been handed the responsibility by the people of North Dakota. You have a certain obligation to the office. You feel you've talked about it. Would you do anything like what's alleged in this indictment about former President Trump?
Well, I've only made one campaign promise so far, and that's if elected, I will get down to the southern border in the first 2 weeks, not take 2 years like Biden did. And I can also tell you that when president and when we leave the office, that we will follow every rule related to handling classified documents.
Governor Sununu was just on. He said he had a good breakfast with you, but he said this is a competition. There's only one top spot. You're in the business world. You can't just get a little bit of market share. You have to get you have to get the most and biggest share. And his argument is that candidates like you have to make a clear distinction with the front runner. And this is a pretty big opportunity, particularly for somebody talking about the values they were imbued with by living in a small town, to make a moral claim about the office and the attributes required for it, but you're not.
Well, I think obviously the way we've conducted ourselves when I was a CEO, when I've been governor, when you have the responsibility, the top spot, it's important to make sure that you're not only doing a great job for the people you're serving, but when you're the office holder for a period of time, and there's a dignity and a discipline that goes with being a governor and goes with being the president, and certainly we would strive to uphold that going forward, because it's such a key institution going forward. But yeah, absolutely. That's what we'd be focusing on, making sure we're doing that. And like I said, you've written about the importance of that.
Let me ask you about a moment from you had an interview with the Fargo Forum in which you said that there's a silent majority that's being neglected. Quoting you, all the engagement right now is occurring on the edge. What did you mean?
Well, I think it's not just silent. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah doesn't call it the silent majority, it's the exhausted majority. But the majority of Americans and the people that are touched every day by these issues of inflation, of government red tape, of high gas prices, of an open border, it's affecting every American. They're not on social media. They're not watching the cable news programs. That's the majority of Americans. And so I think, again, in the tech world, we always said, hey, when you're building a global world-class company from nothing, you've got to separate what's signal and what's noise. And there's a lot of noise, and a lot of that noise is in the echo chambers on the edges, and that exhausted majority in the middle, they're yearning for leadership that's going to come and talk to them and listen to them about the issues that are affecting them in their everyday lives. And just in the few short days we've been on the trail, we know that in the 2 days in Iowa, yesterday here in New Hampshire, there are people that want to talk about the issues facing this country and how it affects them in their lives every day.
During the COVID pandemic, in the toughest part of it, you talked about masks, and you said that everybody needed to be empathetic towards those who might wear it. You said dial up your empathy and your understanding. Are there other issues in the world you see today in domestic politics where you would apply that same guidance for people?
Well, when we talk about the best of America, growing up in a small town, the best of America is when neighbors help neighbors. When a farmer in North Dakota falls ill, the neighbors rally around, whether it's to get the crop planted or the crop harvested. You know, every spring in western North Dakota in the Badlands, when it's time for spring branding and Roundup, the neighbors show up. They couldn't get the work done if they weren't neighbors helping neighbors, and we need to get back to that. And I think part of what, you know, our real enemies, you know, when we talk about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they love it when we're fighting with each other. They love it when we're just, you know, throwing insults back and forth at each other. But we have to approach, and one of the bywords we have in our administration is curiosity. Curiosity to understand where the other person is coming from. And with that, it also, I know America has built its economy around innovation. And we have the Biden administration completely focused on regulating our industries out of business as opposed to focusing on innovation. And the way you get to innovation is you get there through curiosity and understanding that everybody can contribute to the conversation.
All right, Governor Doug Burgum, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. Good luck out on the campaign trail, and we'll be back in a moment with our panel.
News at your fingertips. Search KFES in your app store.
And we're back with our Elections and Surveys Director, Anthony Salvanto, and we're also joined by Cook Political Report's Amy Walter, as well as our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. It's good to be with all of you. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. More numbers. Give us the top line number of the Republican field right now.
So Donald Trump is still on top, comfortably, and in two important ways. One, very simply, in vote choice. He's at 61% when people say who they would support right now. But in another very important way, in consideration. That's when people can pick multiple candidates, one more if they like, because this is a point in the campaign where they're evaluating things more generally, and he's up in that consideration too.
So there's not a special second candidate that's hiding in the wings according to consideration. But don't answer that, because I want to ask you, in terms of what the former president is talking about, is it what people want to hear?
No. In a short answer. They don't want to hear him talk about 2020. They don't want to hear him talk about himself or the past. They want to hear him talk about plans for the country. And yet, he's still leading.
Yep. Amy, what do you make of that in this current context where there's the first indictment of the former president, federal indictment?
I think there are two things. One is, if the leadership of the party and his own rivals are echoing what Trump is saying about this indictment, this is politically motivated, this is rigged, this is a witch hunt, why should we believe that voters are going to feel any differently? So they're kind of all following each other in this. And the other one about why are they not talking about the number one issue? If you talk to the folks in and around, say, the DeSantis campaign, they believe the only way to go and chip away at Trump's support is to go at him from the right on some of these cultural issues. That's where they see him as most vulnerable. And when you talk about the economy, voters overwhelmingly, I'm sure you've seen this in your polling already, Anthony, voters in the Republican primary think that Trump did a great job on the economy. So trying to out-economy him is going to be very difficult.
And also, he may not have to talk about it much. They're like, yep, he's our guy. We'll check that box. He can talk about whatever he wants, because we've assumed he's going to do a great job.
And this is where the governor that you just argued is, Burgum is trying to make his case that, look, I'm actually the business guy. I've actually done this. I'm going to address those issues. Getting that traction, though, is going to be very difficult when we still are focused much more on what's going on with Trump than anybody other candidate.
I want to ask about that blocking, which we talked a little bit about with Governor Sununu. Ed, you've been out on the trail. There are some of former President Trump's rivals who are trying to make the moral case, who are trying to make, how's that going for them?
Not very well, as you can see in these numbers. I mean, 1%, right? Fraser Hutchinson, Chris Christie, probably too early to measure. What I was struck by is that the top five there in the consideration category, so it was Trump, DeSantis, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. Those are the names I heard from voters. Oh yeah, the five of them. And so that sort of gives you a sense that at this point, maybe that's the ball game, right? That Trump is obviously double digits ahead of all of them. But if anybody else right now in name ID, staffing operations has a shot at Iowa and New Hampshire, it's probably those 5 right now. I'm struck too by Governor Burgum's decision this week to come out and say, I'm going to talk about the economy, energy, and national security. In some ways, energy bleeds into the other 2. So maybe really he's just running for energy secretary one day. But he's made a point, and it's just been proven in the polling, that most voters want to be listening to candidates talk about inflation and the economy, which for more than a year, right, has been the #1 concern.
And when you get there, by the way, that's what's on your plate.
Right.
The stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, first of all, it always feels good when the reporter on the ground is seeing the same things.
And let's stop for a minute. Let's really look at what they're talking about as far as the economy, the dollar, the almighty dollar. What has put us in this position? Various markets that has played with the people, that has driven the oil prices up, and because the oil prices got driven up, so did everything else. Now, what are we facing right now, presently, towards OPEC dropping over 1 million barrels of oil a day, towards putting the strain on the system once more again in regards towards supply and demand? We're seeing prices going up, which if the prices goes up on the pump, the prices will go up on the shelf. So they're still hammering around the inflation, but they're not hitting it on the nail towards what has caused this to begin with. Of course, you have to go back 20 plus years ago. I go back 30 plus years ago in recognizing that the American people, as well as the oil, petroleum tycoons, was purposely lying to the American people about global warming, about environmental changes that was occurring, because it was not profitable for them. Why would an oil company promote electric cars? Or why would a oil company promote towards everybody leaving the natural gas or the propane gas industry and going over into some other type of energy? They're not. They will not. They won't. And it hasn't been in just within the past few years of the Green New Deal that even, yes, Donald J. Trump was against, because he didn't believe that global warming was real. He was one of them that was promoting that ideal. Now, I don't know if he was promoting it out of ignorance. I don't know if he was promoting it because most of his people that supporting him are the big oil corporate techs. I don't know. But the bottom line is this: we are facing calamity after calamity after calamity pertaining to the earth changing drastically. I don't think in today's society in the year 2023 that anybody in their right mind can deny that. Especially the younger generation that realizes that the older generation was misled. Now, this is where we have to get back on target, because it's not just our inflation economically that depends upon this, but it's basically our very own lives. Because if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, regardless whether it be a fire that's out of control, or a flood that's out of control, or tornadoes, or hurricanes, or plagues, or pandemics, or whatever. The people in Ukraine, they're dying by the dozens. The people over in Russia are dying by the dozens. I mean, you have to look at the reality of the facts that if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, it could actually cost you your life. And no, you do not have to be in a banana republic country to be going through such horrible, horrible conditions. Granted, the people in the third world countries right now, the banana republic, those are the ones that's suffering the worst. You wonder how come people are wanting to make it to the border that are basically committed to paying the ultimate cost? It's because they realize that if they stay where they're at, their life is already in peril to begin with. So what's the difference in staying where you're at and dying and taking a chance on dying to get to a better haven? That's the reason why we're seeing this influx of all the illegal immigrants that's coming over to America, because they are frightened. They are scared. They are at their point of no return towards realizing that if they continue to stay where they're at, odds are they're not going to make it. Whenever you have that type of illegitimacies going on in Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, El Salvador, and all the other southern South American countries, whenever you have all that type of illegitimacy going on, if me and you was in the same predicament and we had 2 or 3 children, we would be willing to do the same as them. It has been a failure from day one in what the Reagan administration and the Bush administration did not do that should have done pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy. I cannot state that enough. That has put us where we are today, right now, in not only our country that's receiving great horrors, but all these other countries. Because if things would have been handled in a proper form, I truly believe that we would not be where we are right now. We could actually all be involved in some sort of a revival involving a revolution, that in the event of a revolution that would manifest itself towards a utopia. Some sort of a temporary peace or utopia that the Bible talks about, that I first started promoting in the first part of the Windmill Ministries missions for 20 plus years, that was denied, that was rejected, and was not supported. Now you wonder how come I turned. I turned in 2009 after I realized that my life had been turned totally upside down on account of these antichrists that's working through these people that basically did not only want the Windmill Ministries to succeed, but they didn't want none of God's children to succeed. This thing is real, pertaining to fighting up against the Prince of Powers. And whenever it comes to people being willing to say anything or do anything to save their own hides, that's exactly what I'm seeing right now, again, right here in Northwest Tennessee, which questions the fact that is the younger generation really any better than the older generation? Because I'm still seeing the same characteristics out of the young generation that I did the old generation. Now, I'm hopeful in the fact that maybe there'll be enough truth that will come out to the younger generation that they will reform from what the older generation done, because they realize how high that the stakes are. But as of right now, in the year 2023, even though I have produced and made and worked as much as I have towards being on social media and put out the amount of work that I put out there in digital data form, as of right now, I still do not see that movement. Not that true movement that it talks about in the Bible. So because of that, I have a tendency of wondering that maybe the younger generation is just as dumbfounded as the older generation was, or maybe they're paying more attention to the scriptures in chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, of analyzing the latter part of the verse more so than the first part of the verse, and because of it, it puts us all in a stalemate once more again. This stalemate that we're in right now is costing millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars every day. And it's costing millions, thousands, and millions of people's lives every day towards seeing the suffering that's going on. Now, I don't know what it's going to take to jar people off of their rear ends of realizing that the older generation that should have made biblical Bible prophecy more prevalent in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't know what it's going to take to get them to get off their rear ends to say, you know what, this man is right. We made a mistake. We prejudged this guy. We didn't support this guy. We didn't get in behind the founder of the Windmill Ministries, and because of it, it has caused a hardship into all of our lives. I don't know what it's going to take. And you know what? They may not actually ever reform from their concept that they have obviously been bamboozled in, deceived in, to the degree that they're actually willing to let the whole ship go down just to be able to save their own hides. And to me, that's one of the most disgusting hardships upon to any great nation, that you have a group of people that because of pride, because of stupidity, because of greed, because of whatever, aren't willing to admit to their wrongs, to go back to the cross and do thy first works over again, because God has not found our works perfect
It's
yet.
also been someone who has economic...
And whenever whenever Joe Biden talks about to finish the job, go back and do the job, finish the job is the fact that the meek is supposed to inherit the earth. The true born-again Christians. The Christians that was pushed aside, that was shoved down the tubes, going back into the late 80s, early 90s, that has once more put us where we are today towards everything in the world coming to ruin. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is do a fact check.
That they want, Republican voters want somebody who's going to fight for them. Because if you do believe as a Republican voter that the system itself...
And you do have to fight. And if those that knows anything about my life don't realize that I've been fighting all along for that peace and utopia, I've been fighting for the Lord Jesus Christ as far as thy kingdom come. If they can't see that, then once more they're blind in one eye and they can't see in the other, or they're just stupid, or not necessarily stupid, but deceived to the degree that they don't want to admit that I was a fighter. Not only was I a fighter about my own personal life, pertaining to the hardships that fell upon my personal life, but I was a fighter towards getting the message out to the people. But once more, if you still do not have supporters, if you still do not have a congregation that supports the founder, you're still throwing words to naught. And that is what has put us where we are today.
All a manipulation of the system creates an appetite for Donald Trump. In other words, if it's all rigged, we want the best rigger in the game on our side.
Well, if that's the case, then I think the polling continues to show us they can nominate him, but he may be set up to lose again.
The system is rigged.
Because overall, in the general election, we're seeing Americans overall believe that this was justified, that he should be prosecuted, right? And then, of course, he lost last time, and there's nothing yet that suggests that he would win.
Donald Trump should not be prosecuted if his reasons are valid, justifiable in him holding those records the way that he did. If that looks like that is a valid reason in the eyes of the general public, then the general public will excuse him or pardon him towards what the DA, the prosecuting attorneys are trying to do to him. But we got to hear that. We got to know the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, to be able to make that assumption. Right now, we don't know the truth, not the whole truth.
Democratic Party about their nominee.
Well, what's interesting about Biden is, okay, he's at 41% approval. He's been in the low 40s for a while. To Ed's point, he does better in approval with folks who want a president that is calm, predictable, right, and steady. And those are all...
You know why? Because that is the old school way. That is what we've been accustomed to. That's the reason why that has put us in the shape that we're in to this day towards being $32 trillion in debt and all these other problems that the American people are facing.
4 in 10 Democrats in this survey saying that they don't think that he should, and their concern is about his second term.
Is this just a repeat, Amy, of 2020?
It sure feels that way,
I mean,
doesn't it?
Structurally,
it structurally
as well
feels
as
that we are going to be fighting and talking about the same types of voters, right? These voters who may not be in love with Joe Biden, but feel as the job that he's doing, but feel as if they have little choice but to vote for him because they don't think the alternative is acceptable. In 2016, or maybe it's a little bit like 2016, are we going to see that repeat where you have a significant number of people that say, I dislike both candidates, but at the end of the day, I'm going to have to go with this person. So you have a whole bunch of people who are even more dispirited about their choice than were in 2020, where people were a little bit more optimistic, at least, about who they were choosing to vote for. But this thing about Biden that has always been the case is even in 2020, the significant number of people who voted for him said, I only voted for him because he wasn't Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So there's never been this cult of
choosing between the lesser of the two evils,
like we saw around Obama, like we obviously see around Donald Trump. So rallying support for Biden has always been about the other rather than about Biden.
You cover the White House. Obviously, Joe Biden's not talking about this, and they won't say anything about it. But one thing that struck me is he had developed some kind of relationship with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, through the debt ceiling negotiations. But now Kevin McCarthy is coming out at the sort of the furthest edge of response and saying this is being led by the president, of which there's no evidence. What does that mean for lawmaking life in Washington going forward?
I think the White House understands that Kevin McCarthy has a real problem holding his own caucus together. And there are Freedom Caucus, arch-conservative members who needed to hear the Speaker say those things in the wake of the debt ceiling agreement. Remember, the House was sent home early this past week because they couldn't move some very simple things through amid the conservative opposition to the debt limit deal. By saying what he said, he's appeasing those guys in hopes that they can all come back next week and get things moving again. The president, the White House understand that McCarthy has to be out there talking, appeasing these people. But at the end of the day, they believe when it comes to a government shutdown threat potentially in September and all the other things they'll have to do, they'll find a way to do it because ultimately chaos just doesn't favor Congress as it's currently constructed.
So they're not taking it personal, just business.
Not this president.
Amy, Ed, and Anthony, thank you so much, and we'll be right back.
This president is old school. Biden has done some good things, but Biden is not up to date on what this country actually needs. But the bottom line is this: we, the people, got thrown off into this concept of choosing between the lesser of the two evils, basically either during Bush and Al Gore or before that presidential campaign, and we're going to walk right back into the same thing, and basically the people being talked into, well, I really don't like this candidate, but because this candidate ain't as bad as that candidate, I'm going to pick the other candidate. This is the reason why that I say if there's ever been a time that we needed to put in a third independent Tea Party like Ross Perot or somebody like Colin Powell or somebody like that, that this is the opportunity of doing that. If you're going to still maintain some sort of a open, free, fair democracy towards the people making a choice of whether or not they want to go in the same direction that we've been going in, or whether or not the people are willing to make a bold decision, because I still believe, this is what I believe, you can take it for what it's worth, but I still believe, pertaining to what we just recently watched, pertaining to Congress making a decision towards shutting down the government and reneging on their debt, that we can renege on part of our debt that will eliminate the vast majority of the debt and still maintain our government and keep things afloat. Now, I don't know how that can be done. I haven't looked into the research of all that. Once more, I'm not a politician. I'm not a war analyst. I'm more or less a peace analyst. I'm more or less a biblical Bible prophecy analyst. I am not some sort of politician. I'm not running for some sort of a position in politics. But the fact of the matter is, I think that somebody could have put their heads together, especially this time, in making a rational decision that we're going to do this and still maintain this. How come the American people cannot chew gum and walk at the same time is still beyond me. And whenever I say the American people, I'm talking about the representatives for the American people. I'm talking about Congress. I'm talking about our legislation. How come they cannot walk, chew gum at the same time? How come it has to be either this or that? How come, and what has put us in the position to where we continually, presidential election after election after election, towards making these assumptions by saying, oh, I really don't like this candidate, but I'm going to choose between the lesser of the two evils. That's a bunch of BS, and I think the majority of people that hear this are going to agree with me that it's a bunch of BS, because this is the same avenue that we have been forced to take now for several years that has put us illegitimately where we are right now. And it's really sad, because it's only tearing this country apart. Just like all these trials that they're talking about going into down in Miami, all that's going to be time wasted that our government could be applying its energy and its time towards resolving other major issues for the people. It's a diversion. It's a diversion towards getting us unfocused on the areas that we ought to be focused upon. In the meantime, you got China that's succeeding. They're building transportation vehicles that do something like 400 miles an hour on rail. In the meantime, you got stocks and bonds that's basically railroading our ordinary stocks and bonds.
Tells further for you in just a little bit. Also developing right now some new concerns.
In the meantime, you got all this haggling going on pertaining to our laws and bringing up things about people that should have already had a closed seal on, just like what they done to Donald J. Trump up there in New York City about that woman. Our legislation has put rails on our laws to where those laws cannot be taken advantage of. And whenever you have laws, regardless whether it's misdemeanor laws, state laws, or federal laws, that once you run out on the statute of limitations, that means you run out on the statute of limitations. That means you didn't capture the guy in the right time frame. And because you didn't capture the guy in the right time frame, you can huff and puff and blow and smoke and roar and rat and rave all you want, but you're still not going to get nothing done. You're still not going to get nothing done. Why? Because you didn't meet it under the criteria. There was a purpose that particular charge that meets that criteria has a certain particular guardrail on it. That's just like the guardrail of murder. And you have to look at what went on in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, towards it being a murderous event of 168 people, just like you have to look at what went on in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas in 1993, towards it being a deliberate entrapment murdering event. There is no statute of limitations on murder. It don't matter if it's one person's death, illegitimate death, or a whole group of people's illegitimate death. That's the reason why it is so crucial that my work gets out before the people and that they can make their own decision about the facts that have recently been discovered, not only about the Oklahoma bombing, but also about the facts towards what has now surfaced towards the who, the what, the when, and the why regarding what actually went on down in Mount Carmel that led to the destruction of all them people's lives, including the lives of federal agents. You have to look at the whole truth and not just part of the truth. That's another reason why that our foundation of our laws is based on, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. In other words, it fits under every angle, every aspect towards telling the whole thing. Not just part of it, but the whole thing. And whenever you have a society that's no longer being run under those same pretenses, then you have a society that is basically moving off the rail towards normalcy and creating their own vigilante rules, creating their own vigilante whatever. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that should have all been thrown out of court pertaining to what went on up there with Donald J. Trump in New York City. That should have been thrown out based upon the time frame. Now, what is going on today in regards towards the charges? Those are things that all the people, we the people, need to listen very carefully before we make a determination of whether or not we are to throw Donald J. Trump completely under the bus. And trust me, I don't like a lot of the things that he has said. I don't like a lot of the things he has done. But just because he made stupid decisions and he said stupid things does not mean that he created a criminal offense. Once more, you are innocent until proven guilty. We know that he made stupid decisions. We know that he made stupid remarks. But that doesn't mean that he committed an actual crime. If he has committed a crime, then he needs to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, etc., etc. But if he hasn't committed a crime, and this is an act of weaponizing from the Democratic Party, then he needs to be exonerated, and then he needs to go on with his life. Because, like I said, I personally would like to know the why did he feel like holding on to those records was so substantial in taking such of a risk that he was willing to take that risk. And it may be justifiable depending upon what he found. Because he's already done made mention about the Saudi Arabians, about how that the people in general has not gotten down to the bottom of 9/11. He himself kicked off his campaign over in Waco, Texas, and he had to have done that for a reason, because I think personally that he has seen the injusticeness that went on regarding the Davidians, and regardless of what we feel or what we think in regards to that event, the bottom line is that the law are the professional people, and the law should be held to the fullest extent of the law, especially if the law themselves broke the law pertaining to the Waco incident. And to me, it was one of the most sorriest things that any law enforcement agencies could ever have thought of doing, was basically to lure and basically to move upon to a group of people that was weak-minded to begin with. They was all scared to death. They all thought that the sky was fixing to fall. They was all a bunch of Bible thumpers. And to prey upon them people is bad enough. That'd be like preying on an elderly person or preying on a child. But to purposely sell them guns and then turn around and bust them for the very guns that you sold them because they didn't pay a certain tax, to me, goes beyond comprehension of fairness. That why in the world would the law that's supposed to be protecting the people, protecting us, why would have they done that? Number two, why didn't they bust the guy whenever he was coming in and out of the compound? Number three, they knowed that their plans had been spoiled and that now the Davidians was waiting for them. How come they didn't back away from that? I could go on and on and on towards violations that was made all the way to the leading of the 51-day standoff, to the point that they basically barbecued them people right in front of the world and then tried to make it out that it was justifiable. Whenever you have a society that cannot determine the difference between right and wrong, just and injusticeness, then you have a society that is running wild. Then you have a society that God only knows what the next abrupt move will be, or what the next obstacle will be towards that society having to go through what they're going through. And until they're willing to stop, listen, talk, debate, and understand the things that we have done in the past that has put us where we are today in the present, and the only way to change the present is to change our actions, change our frame of mind, change the things that we have been doing to be able to change the future results. And if we're not willing to do that as adults, guess what? We're fixing to walk off the edge of the cliff. And I'm just afraid that once we all walk off the edge of the cliff, it will be irreversible at that point in time. And, you know, Winston Churchill can say what he wants to say about his analogy that the Civil War here in America was basically a perfect storm. and it was unpreventable because this set up to this and this set up to that and that set up to this, and basically all the elements all come together. But I personally would like to believe that if somebody had enough logical sense during the time of the Civil War, that they could have sat down and reasonably worked their problems out without having to kill men, women, and innocent children. I would like to believe that if somebody would have been a spokesman in bringing out the whole truth and not just part of the truth, maybe there could have been a compromise, and maybe that Civil War could have been diverted. So whenever somebody like Winston Churchill makes an assumption that it was unpreventable and that it could not have been prevented because it was based upon this element, and that element towards it being the perfect storm. Whenever somebody says something like that, I disagree with them. Because as long as there's air in the lungs, as long as there's people with decent minds, with consciousness and fortitude, I believe that we can work out our things in more of a reasonable way rather than going at it towards butchering one another up. But that's the direction that we're heading in right now. We're heading in the direction towards butchering one another up. And I tend to wonder if it's just as bad being purposely set up on one party as it is the other party. And that's the reason why I say it's time to break away from both parties. They have become corrupted in their motives, in their ideals, and you got to look at the facts towards whatever put us in the position, to the degree that we're all in a stalemate position, to where now it seems like on every election we come up with the assumption that, well, we really don't like that candidate, but we're going to vote on him or her to begin with because it's the lesser of the two evils. We need somebody in office that can come up with solutions to the problems. And if you can't come up with solutions to the majority's problems, then it's time for you to take your hat and get it out of the arena. Regardless whether you're Trump, Biden, or whoever. Now, it's just been within the past 2 years that the Democrat Party has finally romped and stomped enough on the Green New Deal that it's finally woken up a lot of people's eyes pertaining to we are in fact changing the world pertaining to environmental crises. Is it too late to reverse that? I don't know. I wish I could answer that. I personally think that we are a day late and a dollar short, but it's worth a try towards seeing if we couldn't reverse the damages we've already done towards not making the same mistakes again in the future. I just pray to God that somebody will have enough fortitude about them that will put aside these major mega conglomerates pertaining to the oil industry and saying, we're not listening to your lies no more. There is other alternative energies out there. Matter of fact, if you'll get to looking in some of your data, social media data, they can actually formulate now energy off of waves. They can now formulate energy off of various cycles pertaining to origins in the ground. There's all kinds of ways that we can do things differently that will be a benefit to global extensive warming, because if we don't watch, we're going to wind up being extinct. And once we become extinct, then what finger are we going to point other than pointing the finger towards ourselves by saying, how come we didn't listen to that guy that was trying to tell us all this stuff back years and years ago that has led us to the extinction? Now, if I'm not mistaken, there was United Nations, if I'm not mistaken, that put out this commercial about this dinosaur that walks into a big party that talks about the extinction of the dinosaurs, that how come we're going to make the same mistakes. I felt like that was a very, very well orchestrated commercial, even if it was coming from the United Nations, because we are driving not only ourselves off into extinction, but all of plant life, animal life, marine life, etc., off into extinction. This thing should have been addressed properly 20 plus years ago whenever Al Gore, Vice President Gore, on Bill Clinton's administration, brought it to our attention. But it wasn't. It was not. Once more, the man that you're looking at right there, he may have matured to the degree that now he's willing to say that he was wrong about global warming. Maybe he's willing to participate in global warming reform. I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, neither party, Republican or Democrat, are worthy of being able to run America any longer. In other words, the State of the Union has failed us. And because the State of the Union has failed us, maybe it's time to reenact. Maybe it's time to come to our senses. Maybe it's time for us to make our own choices towards who and what we want to listen to and what we want to be driven by or governed by. Because it's obvious that for the past 30 plus years, the governorship that has led us down this endless road of doom and gloom are the very people that are still trying to hang on to their positions. As far as I'm concerned, they all need to go home. You need to start afresh. You need to do a sweep out, beginning at the White House down to the church house, down from the church house to the schoolhouse, from the schoolhouse all the way down to the outhouse. And I know that may sound unattractive to a lot of people. But the bottom line is, if we continue on the path that we are on, we are going to drive not only ourselves, but the rest of the world off into a state of extinction. And I tend to wonder that would be easier for a whole lot of people to face and to accept, rather than to come clean and to say, well, you know what, the individual that's talking to you right now in behind the camera, he's the guy that we should have really supported. He's the guy that we should have listened to back years ago, rather than putting him on the back burner and trying to basically stomp at him and tromp at him. That he was the guy that had the message of peace to begin with, but we as a society, especially the so-called Christian society, wasn't willing to listen to him because it was too strong of a message. And we was more concentrated on the latter part of Revelation chapter 6 verses 3 and 4 than we was the first part of Revelation chapter 6 verse 3 and 4. And until we're willing to acknowledge that and wake up to that, we are heading down a path of doom and gloom.
On 37 federal felony counts stemming from an investigation into his mishandling of classified documents. Trump making multiple campaign stops this weekend despite the indictment, saying he is the victim of a politicized justice system.
They're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I'm just standing in their way. The baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power in the history of our country.
Walt Nauta, Trump's valet, who was federally indicted alongside Trump, was seen traveling with him yesterday. You see him there. He, too, faces arraignment. Earlier today, a Trump attorney and Trump's former attorney general gave differing views on the case.
An indictment is a one-sided document. He has a defense. The defense is real. He had the Presidential Records Act, which only he has in play.
If even half of it is true, then he's toast. I mean, it's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning.
And new reaction today from Capitol Hill's lawmakers on both sides of the aisle give differing views on the severity of the case.
Reading the indictment, it was just stunning, the brazenness, the premeditation, the active efforts to obstruct, to mislead, and I think that if the evidence backs up the allegations in the indictment, it's a pretty powerful case.
He has said time and time again he's declassified all this material. This is the most political thing I have ever seen.
Mr. Jordan and Donald Trump and his defense team can try to spin this any way they want, but the evidence based on his own recording, his own voice, says to the contrary.
And a new look.
You know, if people just wanted to be one-sided and look, I'm going to use this as an illustration. If they just wanted to listen to what the government wanted to promote about Eric Snowden, about how that Eric Snowden had basically portrayed their oath, and Eric Snowden revealed to the American people and how that our government has the potential now of spying on various people. If we only listen to the one-sided case coming from the government officials about Eric Snowden, we as individuals would all basically be united in believing that Eric Snowden was nothing more than a fraud, and that Eric Snowden was nothing more than a traitor to his own government. But when you have a government that's willing to do this to its own people, that's unjustifiable according to our Constitution, because we have a right to our own privacy. Just like what they was talking about a while ago, a doctor makes a sworn oath to protect their patient with classified secrecy. That's the reason why the HIPAA law is in effect, is because can't just any and everybody make a telephone call to the hospital and want to know somebody's information. And if they do give it out, they're breaking the HIPAA law, Privacy Act. People has a right to privacy. Well, according to Eric Snowden, our government no longer abides by that. Especially if you've ever said anything against them, or they wanted to classify you towards being a potential threat, and they put you on this big spook list like they have myself. So in reality, I have nothing to lose but everything to gain by making my story public out before the people. And I started taking notice of this back, I guess it was over 20 years ago, and since 2005 especially, that our government agencies basically works on the same level as Secret Service. Now you can understand that Secret Service operates in secrecy, especially due to the fact of how many people that they have to deal with. But whenever you have all law enforcement agencies that's working the same way, and they do it to the benefit of themselves, they don't do it to the benefit of the people that they're trying to degrade. They only tell one side of the story because there was somebody smart enough to look at both sides of the story with Eric Snowden. Now we have made our own conclusions, and just about as many people, if not more, says that what Eric Snowden done should be looked upon as being heroic. And what Eric Snowden done needs to be rewarded by the President of the United States towards giving him some sort of a reward. A medal. But have you seen our president do that? Any one of our presidents since the Eric Snowden deal come out, have you seen anybody offer that's that high up in office to say, you know what, we're going to look at this in a different perspective, and we're going to make things right with Eric Snowden, and we're going to offer for him to come to the United States knowing that he's over in Russia hiding out. We're going to offer for him to come over here, and we're going to turn a wrong into a right. Has anybody offered myself any type of reward or any type of medal pertaining to me sticking my neck out and going out to Waco, Texas, Mount Carmel, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and saying, Dennis, instead of you being badgered or cut down or put down or put into a limelight of somebody that's being harmful and hurtful to their own people, you should actually be looked upon towards deservingly getting some sort of a medal. We have a society right now that's mixed up. They don't know what's up. And that's exactly what this government wanted to do. This government wanted to create so much confusion, so much uncertainty, that now it's reached a level that now nobody trusts nobody. And whenever you have a society that's working in that format, you have a very, very dangerous society, to the point that anything and everything could happen. Just like the January 6th deal. If that deal would have been more organized, more coordinated, I guarantee you it could have turned out to have been a million, zillion, trillion times worse than what any politician or any human being could ever begin to imagine, if things would have been pulled off in a certain way. And I tend to wonder if the people that are in charge of all these situations, that they're deliberately allowing for this to happen. I don't know if they're doing it intentionally. I don't know if they're doing it ignorantly. But the bottom line is this: Donald Trump did say something to Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, at that time, towards, do you think we need to bring in extra protection? And the call was hers. No, I do not. We'll be satisfied with what we already have pertaining to Capitol Police. But yet now, whenever the government presents the case in front of the people, they don't discuss that part pertaining to January 6th. They only discuss the fact that Donald J. Trump stood idly by. It was over 2 hours in which he did. And the truth of what the government is promoting about Donald Trump is in fact the truth. But they're not promoting the whole truth. These are called half-truths, because they're not telling the whole story to the American people. Just like the American people that was lied to about the Mount Carmel, Waco 51-day standoff. If the whole truth would have come out, I truly believe to this day there would have been a different response from we the people in regards towards what actually occurred, how it occurred, why it occurred, etc., etc. And if it would have been handled differently, this is the part that I go at. If there would have been a different response coming from our government and from the people, maybe, just maybe, some idiot like Timothy McVeigh and Nichols wouldn't have done what they done on the anniversary 2 years leading to that, because they was actually trying to vindicate those people's death that died, the deaths that they died down in Mount Carmel in the 51-day standoff. But once more, whenever you have a government that's not willing to acknowledge this, when you have a law enforcement agency pertaining to the ATF and the FBI down in Texas that's not willing to acknowledge this, then you have all these uncertainties. Then you have basically chaos. Once again, I think that the American people deserve to know why Donald J. Trump thought that it was serious enough in the information that he was exposed to towards taking the risk that he took in holding those documents. We know that the documents was held. We know who got the documents. We know that other presidencies, maybe not all, but most all, have taken stuff out of the White House that rightfully did not belong to them, including the Clintons pertaining to furniture. But if the truth be known, you could probably go to every one of them pertaining to their museum, and you will discover things in there that rightfully should not have been promoted to the public because of the secrecy, because of the tendency of what it could have been misconstrued as if it did come out publicly to the eyes of the people. In other words, it was a sensitive document that could have been misconstrued, and because it could have been misconstrued, it probably needed to be shuffled away, hidden away, off into the back closet somewhere, and nobody really ever had the opportunity of reading or analyzing or deciphering what that agreement or what that was talking about to begin with. Now, if Donald Trump has taken these records and he's selling them, if Donald Trump is purposely giving these records to our enemy, if Donald Trump is purposely going up against the will of the American people, then he needs to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law pertaining to high treason. But if he hadn't been doing all of that, then the American people has a right to know that, and then Donald Trump needs to be liberated because of how that Joe Biden and his administration pertaining to the district attorney and the prosecuting attorneys has basically justifiably went after this guy in the way that they're going after him, towards trying to make him out to be an enemy of the state or the enemy of the nation pertaining to high treason. Now, this didn't cost you nothing. The information I just gave you did not cost you a thing. This is my opinion, the opinion of the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. I've got a right to my opinion. I've got a right to voice my opinion. I've got a right to promote my opinion. And this is one of the reasons why that I continue to thank social media platform, regardless whether it's YouTube or Facebook or whatever, towards thanking them, because of the fact that now today we can honestly go before each other, sitting at the same table, discussing the facts, not just part of the facts, but all the facts, in determining our final determination.
And Americans feel about the indictment. A just released ABC News Ipsos poll finds nearly half of Americans agree Trump should have been charged in this case. 91% of Democrats view the indictment as serious, while only 38% of Republicans do. And even if convicted, Donald Trump is vowing to stay in the 2024 presidential race, telling Politico, quote, "I'll never leave."
There's no doubt that the charges are very, very serious. But has the charges been misconstrued? Are they trying to put thoughts? Are they trying to put ideals? Are they trying to put assumptions into the American people's minds of believing one thing about Donald J. Trump when it should have been or could have been something else? He may have seen some information, especially if it's got to do with 9/11 pertaining to the Saudi Arabian government or any of the above. He may have seen some information that he felt that rightfully the American people had a right to know, because that man standing right there has made claims that the American people has not yet gotten down to the bottom of 9/11. And I know for a fact that there's people in New York City right now that's jumping up and down pertaining to how that they feel portrayed by the National Golf Association, the PGA Association, that basically said one thing and then turned around and done just the opposite about a year later. The American people are tired of being bullied. The American people are tired of being crapped on. The American people are wisening up to what these politicians are doing and what they have done. And it could have been that Donald Trump felt like that he had information that deservedly needed to be shared with the American people that would be able to get down to the bottom of 9/11 towards what actually occurred and who was behind it and who allowed it to happen. I know for a fact if you'll do enough investigation online, you will see where there is FBI agents, more than one, that will validate and tell you that they followed the paper trail pertaining to the money trail whenever the terrorist was over here training to wanting to fly airplanes, but wasn't nobody concerned about landing them, especially down in Florida. I think that was where the aviation station was, where they was learning to fly. But then again, it may have been more than just one aviation station where they was learning their license to fly. But if you'll listen to what the FBI has to say about that, the FBI follows the money trail right back to the Saudi Arabians. Now, Saudi Arabia acted like, whenever they realized what was going on with bin Laden, their cousin, that all of a sudden they banded bin Laden, and they didn't want to have nothing to do with bin Laden, because they was acting as if at that point in time that they did not have anything to do with 9/11. Even though it was the family that was over here during the attack of 9/11, and the day after aviation had been grounded, Bush gave them approval of leaving the continental United States. As Donald Trump has said, the American people has not yet got down to the bottom of 9/11. This is something that I have been disclosing and talking about now for quite some time, for at least 3 years or longer, that people has made fun of, they have laughed at, they have mocked. Of course, they made fun of the fact of me putting out a sign pertaining to the Mississippi River beginning to go dry too, and that was in the early 90s. There's so many things that so many people does not understand, or they bring up their own assumptions about people, and basically what they're doing, they're trying to validate their own actions, and their actions are inappropriate. Their actions are wrong, and that's exactly what they done during the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ looked at them and questioned them right before they got ready to actually give him the beating that they gave him with the bullwhip, and right before they made him pull the cross up onto the hill. He asked them, "For what good work do you persecute me over?" And they stood there momentarily and thought, we can't be persecuting this man over a good work, can we? We can't say that we're killing him over a good work. So they come up with another ideal. Well, for a good work, they said, we're not persecuting you over. But for you claiming to be the Son of Man, the Son of God, towards being basically the Messiah, that's the reason why that we're killing you, because we feel like that you are bogus. We feel like that you are a liar. We feel like that you are a blasphemer, Jesus Christ. That's the reason why we're going to hang you on a cross and kill you. And the very people that was trying to justify their own actions was the very people themselves that was committing the blasphemy, that was committing the crimes. Because Jesus Christ had not done nothing deservingly to have gotten any of that, much less all of that. And we see that again and again and again, regardless whether it's American politicians or good people in general, that basically get thrown on the bus and they get persecuted for their good behavior or their good works, while other ones get basically barely a pat on the hand in punishment towards the things that they have done. It's manipulation. What is manipulating the people the way that they're being manipulated? It's this antichrist spirit. It's this Luciferian Lucifer. It's this spirit of paranormal behavior that has become powerful in these last days, that is coming down, just like the Bible talks about, in great wrath, because it, not he, but it knows its time is short. Now, I could go on with this and on with this and on with this, and until people are willing to open up and listen and wake up, they're going to be just exactly like that group of people that Noah preached to day after day after day, that if you continue to do what you're doing, you're going to die. You're going to die in your sins. You're going to die in your sins. Even Jesus Christ said the very same thing to all them people. You're going to die in your sins. You're not going to die standing up for a righteous cause. You're going to die in your sins. And that's exactly what happened to the people during the era of Noah. And that's exactly what's going to happen to this group of people today, regardless whether it be the group of people in America or the group of people all over the planet. They're going to continue until they continue in their self-gratifications in bringing destruction to not only their lives, but to the lives of the innocent. Now, if that's the path that people that listen to my material wants to continue to keep taking, then continue to keep doing the same thing, continue to keep believing in the same lies, continue to keep believing in the same way that you're believing, and that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to become extinct. Just like that dinosaur that walked up into that meeting of the United Nations that talked about where we are right now, pertaining to global warming.
There's a lot to unpack for you with our reporters and analysts in place covering all the angles of this story.
I'm going to let it go right here at this because I think I've already run my course on the other channel in regards towards Face the Nation. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your prayers. We want to say God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here, especially pertaining to the seriousness of all these things that are coming out half-sidedly, that the American people deserve to know the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. I want to say thank you. God bless you. And if there's ever been a time that I believe that we needed to pray for one another in bond, and pray for our great nation, and pray for our government, pray for our communities, pray for one another, it is that time. Because this cannot go on much longer before there will be a calamity that will befallen upon to the American people such as they could not ever begin to imagine. Thank you, God bless, and good luck. And heaven help us all.